Morning. We have a quorum and it's already the appointed time. Welcome to PWSC morning meeting. Agenda item number 1 is to deal with a late application for entry into our panel, our subcommittee. So we need to deal with this item first. That is to consider Mr. WAN Siu-kin's late application for entry into the subcommittee. So his application was made on 7th of January and the paper has been issued to you. It's PWSC 64/1920, and according to Rules of Procedure 4B, if there is a late application, members who have not returned to Hong Kong or are sick, they can make an application. So for reasons other than being sick or out of Hong Kong, if there are any applications for entry into the subcommittee, they have to put forward full reasons before the subcommittee can consider that application. So regarding Mr. WAN Siu-kin's late application, do we have any comments? Mr. Holden Chow? Chairman, first I want to ask if he applies for our subcommittee, does he have to present his case? I'm just asking, is that the procedure? And second point, of course, when legislators want to participate into the subcommittee, that's a good idea. But I'm curious because his letter, he doesn't provide a lot of reasons, and it's also near the end of the term. So I'd like to understand why would he apply towards the end of the term. I'd like to give him an opportunity to present his case so we can make our decision. I'm just wondering if that's in line with rule of procedure and so on. Okay. Ms. Tanya Chan, Chairman. As a member of PWSC, I welcome new members, and Mr. WAN Siu-kin has been following up on infrastructure housing projects. So regarding his document, I see his reasons, and of course I see he's not in attendance, and my understanding is he is not available temporarily, so we have to await Chairman's decision. Of course, I support his admission, and I hope if other members can accept his application, we can deal with it, and then we can move on to other agenda items. We can talk about the situation regarding the bridge. The government officials have explained, and I would like to deal with the bridge item and also West Kowloon Reclamation. The residents there will have a bridge to use. So, dealing with admission application, I don't see any reasons for rejecting the application. If we don't have any questions or where we need his explanation, then we can put it to a vote. That's one way of dealing with it. But if members feel that they have questions for him, and the applying member needs to answer, then of course we need his attendance. So if we had put forward that request, we need his attendance. Mr. Lam Ji-chang. Well, of course, if he were present, that would have been better. Then he could respond to any questions we might have for him. But if he is out of town on business, then there's nothing we can do about it. In the past, we had similar applications, and some were approved, some were rejected. So I feel Mr. Holden Chow's queries regarding procedure, these are reasonable. Now, I personally don't object to Mr. WAN Siu-kin's application. I think it is very sincere of him to want to follow up on these issues. Well, if the applying member is not present, then maybe we can wait for his return and to decide whether we should allow him to join. Maybe that. Now, I don't object to his entrance, or I don't object to his application. Well, so if members have questions that, as Mr. Holden Chow said, that require Mr. WAN Siu-kin's response in person, then he has to be in attendance to deal with that. Mr. Lok Jong-ho. Well, my opinion is similar to Mr. Liang Ji-chang. I have also made late applications in the past, and I thank members' support. But I think members need to be in attendance if he's not back yet. So I don't know what reasons he might have, and I hope he has an opportunity to explain. So, Chairman, maybe you can reserve that for the next meeting and put it and have it as a priority item. Well, we had previous examples in October 2018 to October 24th. Mr. Hui Siu-feng, the meeting, his application was postponed for one meeting. Mr. Chan Ji-xun, a late application. We've dealt with many of these cases. So if a member has a question and we need the applicant to answer in response, so we've had that in Public Works Subcommittee. Oh, we could also have a permission for we can permit the application. I just want to give a fair comment. He's not in attendance today does not mean that he's doesn't respect our subcommittee, or that he has lack of respect. I won't make that assumption either. And of course, he is aware of today's meeting. He could be in attendance, and even non-members of PWSC, they can attend and even speak. So if he were in attendance to answer questions, that would have been ideal. But since somebody made that request, then we'll have to postpone it to the next occasion. The secretary will notify Mr. WAN Siu-kin, and we hope that he can attend on the next occasion. Okay, thank you, everybody. So we can move on to the next agenda item. Let me summarize the overall situation. In 2019-20, well, we can invite the relevant government officials. In 2019-20 legislative term, as of the last meeting, we had already scrutinized 8 projects, and the total funding approval was 20.31 billion. And we now have 2 agenda items that need to be dealt with, and the 2 items had not been completed in the previous meeting. These 2 items involve funding application of 20.2847 billion. Now, if all the applications are approved, then we'll have a total approved number of 10 items, and the total funding would be 40.316 billion. So aside from land resumption and the computer upgrade items of some 10 billion, the total funding application would total to 30.28 billion. So I want to remind members, if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest with the discussion items, and according to ROP 83A, before you speak, you need to disclose your interest. And I also wish you to take note of ROP Rule 84 regarding voting on matters of pecuniary interest. So we now deal with agenda item number 2, Project 332CL West Kowloon Land Reclamation. The paper is PWSC 2019-2016. The paper proposes to upgrade the project to grade A, and according to money of day calculations, the fee amounts to some 300 million. And on the last occasion, that is on 11th of December, we had already started discussing this paper we had discussed some 2 hours. The government officials, in response to members' requests, they had provided a paper response, PWSC 68/1920-01, and we can now continue our discussion. We have in attendance government officials. We have Ms. Zhao Hokyu, CEDD, Ms. Pang Ale, and we have the chief engineer, Mr. Lei Waiman. And on the last occasion, we had 15 members who had spoken, and let's see if they are present. We have 2 that are not present. Ms. Tanya Chan, 4 minutes, spoke 4 times, 1 minute. Thank you for the paper response and a meeting with legislators to explain the contents. In the supplemental paper, I feel you could still elaborate on some specific questions. For example, why do we need 2 lifts? How do you measure the expected use? So aside from the paper, could Chairman also allow the government officials to give us a brief explanation? How do they determine the need for 2 elevators? Because we still have another similar situation where they need 2 elevators, a travelator to serve a street corner. So they could use this opportunity to explain. So our colleagues, when they do research, they can do a better job. Who can respond? Ms. Pang?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chen. As we have already set out the details in the paper as to our consideration, and let me summarize some of the salient points here. Well, we have to think about a basket of factors in considering this. For the Sam Shui Po footbridge system, upon completion, we're going to remove the pedestrian crossing at grade, and therefore we will also have to bear in mind the connectivity with the neighboring sections, and once it's commissioned, what's the radius of service area. So we're talking about 100 to 500 meters where people will have to make a detour if there is no such lifts available. And the fact that there is enough space for the 2 lifts to be installed, given the situation, we would be prepared to consider installing 1 more lift. Thank you. Is it too succinct, Chairman? Is it that you'd like to hear more? Yes, I understand that Ms. Chen would also like the administration to give us more details about the policy and also technical considerations, so that there can be more details given to us. Because we have also received submissions from some groups representing some of the disabled people, and they said that if there were 2 lifts, that would be more desirable. And last time, you've also heard that there were many questions raised by members here. So, Ms. Pang or Ms. Kwok, can you explain? Okay, Ms. Doris Ho, thank you. Let me supplement. On this particular funding proposal, we have actually considered several factors. As Ms. Pang just explained, well, upon completion of the footbridge, the at-grade pedestrian crossing will be cancelled. And therefore, in considering this proposal to cancel the at-grade crossing, we have to make sure that the pedestrian footbridge would be able to enable people to come down from the footbridge to the at-grade level, and it has to be as convenient as possible. Or else, once the at-grade crossing is cancelled, then when people try to access the footbridge, and if it's not convenient for them to come back down to the at-grade level, then in particular, is a location where there are many students. We are very concerned that there might be traffic accidents. We can also show you some pictures to prove that. So that's point number 1. And number 2, we can see that there are many public facilities nearby, whether it's about those that have been commissioned, or in the near future, we're talking about facilities that are coming on stream. And there are many types of facilities, for example, welfare facilities, some recreational or leisure facilities, and also we're talking about parks and also wet markets and even shopping centers. That's why you can see that some of the target users would be elderly people and also those with special needs, for example, the wheelchair-bound or the disabled. And if every landing point has only got one lift, and in the event that that lift is out of order, then there is another consideration. That is, if there is only one lift and if it breaks down, then for those with special needs, they will have to make a detour. And how long do they have to travel before they can go to another lift? We have done some calculation, and it ranges from 100 to 500 meters, and we're talking about quite a distance. And that's another consideration. Another important consideration is that you can see that nearby, this is a new development area, and also at grade level, we have to provide sufficient construction space, and there is enough space for 2 lifts to be installed. So that's why, after considering all these factors, last time in response to members' questions, we went back and reviewed the situation again, and we believe that to have 2 lifts at the landing points would be appropriate. Next, Fernando Jiang, asking for the 3rd time, 2 minutes. Chairman, for a crossing, once you try to cancel it, and if the access, if the only access is via the footbridge to cross the road, then obviously there are many types of people, including those who are wheelchair bound or physically disabled, and if there is only one lift, of course, it's not good. That's common sense. But then the thing is, when you look at Sham Wong Road, in fact, there are 3 junctions, and you are talking about 3 sets of footbridges, and for every set, it's like this one. You have 4 junctions or 4 corners, and you have at least 2 lifts at each corner. These are good facilities, and of course, we would not be complaining about them. But then the thing is it an over construction? So for each set of such footbridge, after it's completed, you have to repair and maintain it. So from the practical perspective, is there a practical need? It's not that there is no space for you to cross the road. In fact, we do have traffic lights and also pedestrian crossing at grade. But then you're trying to tell us that you want to cancel the at grade pedestrian crossing. You're trying to cancel the traffic lights. So you're trying to cancel the 3 sets of traffic lights, and you're trying to change it into a pedestrian footbridge system for people to cross the roads. Is it necessary? You're talking about 3 junctions and then 3 sets of lifts. They are quite bulky. So that's my concern. And also for Sham Wong Road, if you go to the southwest, or rather it should be northwest, there'll be congestion. And if you go to the southeast, the traffic speed is not that high. And therefore, just this section, if you say that the traffic speed is very high, and you have to convince us by giving us rational figures, why do you have to allow vehicles to travel at high speed, so much so that you have to cancel the pedestrian crossing on both sides? All right, you've already overrun on your time. Please be brief, Ms. Pang. Thank you for your question. With regard to the junction at Sham Wong Road, if you've noticed the picture or the layout plan, as you can see from enclosure 3, when you cross the roads, pedestrians, they will have to make a stop at the safety island, because it's not possible for them to cross the road in one go, because they will have to cross 4 sections. In other words, they will have to cross 8 lanes altogether. And as you can see from the layout plan, in crossing the roads, actually both pedestrians and vehicles are scrambling for the limited road space. That's why, for the safety of the pedestrians, there is a need for us to build this footbridge. Thank you. Next, Ray Chan, asking for the 3rd time, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Today, the administration has given us a very detailed paper responding to the inquiries that we have made with regard to whether or not we need 1 lift or 2 lifts, and they've actually taken pictures to prove that they've considered this very comprehensively, and also the accessibility and so on. And of course, 2 lifts would always be better than 1. And you also said that, well, in average, you will have to close the lift for at least half a day. And therefore, if you have the money and if you have the space and if there is a need and if it's convenient to the residents, then why not? But then let me put it the other way around. All right, you're trying to justify this, and of course you have the justifications. But then, in the contrary, what if we ask you to build just 1 lift, or if we ask you to build 2 lifts instead of 1? Then does it mean that so long as there is space, then you'd be prepared to do so? That may not be the case. Sometimes, in some private housing estates, all right, if you look at the land lease, there is an agreement that it has to be open round the clock, and there would also be lifts providing services to the residents and so on. But then very often they would only provide 1 lift instead of 2. So in the future, is that the principle that you're going to go by? So that that would also be applicable to similar projects in the future, so that as far as possible, you will try to have 2 lifts instead of 1. I believe that for this particular lift, if it has to be closed down for at least half a day for repair and maintenance, then that would also be applicable to most lifts, unless you say that other lifts do not have to be repaired or maintained that regularly. So even for private shopping centers and private housing estates, if they have to fulfill the term in the land lease in providing access to the public, then would you also be requiring them to build 2 lifts instead of 1, so long as there is enough space? So can you answer the questions, Ms. Ho? Thank you, Mr. Chen, and thank you for your question. In determining how many lifts would be needed, when it comes to the policy, the current arrangement is that we do not specifically say that under what circumstances 1 additional lift will be provided. That's true. But then behind that, the rationale is that there should be enough flexibility so that individual projects can also look at the situation on the ground in making the decision. And after listening to members' views, some query whether or not we did not have 1 single standard. That's why we've discussed this with the Bureau and also the Transport Department. That's why, as we explained in Parrot 9, that is after discussing with the Transport Department on this particular occasion, we agree that there should be a review, and the direction of the review is that we hope that for individual projects there would also be flexibility so that they can decide how many lifts would be required given the circumstances. But then there are factors that should be taken on board in determining whether or not there needs to be more than 1 lift. For example, the Transport Department also said that they would be looking at taking this case as an example. For example, in the vicinity, are there many public facilities, and if there is only 1 lift, and in the event that that lift has to be repaired or maintained, and if it breaks down, then what about the people who need to use it? What is the distance of the detour, and also whether or not we would be cancelling the at-grade crossing and so on. So in the future guidelines, we are going to specify these factors so that individual projects could also take these into account. So that those would become the criteria for consideration as to under what circumstances they would require more than 1 lift. Yes, that's the whole purpose. All right, we have spent so much time on this particular case in discussing this. In the future, for local residents or district councils, when they question whether or not a particular project should be built that way, then you could also apply the same criteria that we have talked about in this exercise, so that they can also apply the same criteria in looking at future projects. Yes, as the administration just said, in the design of future projects, they review the criteria, and upon completion of that, they should also go back to the relevant panel to brief the panel. And also there would also be further opportunities for discussion, because at the PWSC we are not supposed to discuss the policy matters. But then because of this project, I think both last time and also this morning, we asked the administration to give us clearer explanation as to the rationale behind this, and also the thinking behind this, and also the technical and environmental factors that they have taken into account. Okay, Mr. Wu Chi-wei asking for the 3rd time, 2 minutes. Chairman, there are 2 points. Well, for enclosure 2, they talk about some phenomenon. Very often during the morning peak hours, it's quite common to see that people cannot cross the road in one go, and they will have to stay on the safety island and wait for another round. So can the Development Bureau or the administration do a comprehensive review or investigation to see how that can be improved? So I'm not suggesting that you must build a footbridge, but then can you have a bigger safety island? And also for the crossing arrangements, you can also make reference to overseas experience. For example, instead of making a 90-degree turn, you can also realign the crossing so that they can just cross the road in one go. So would that become a regular exercise in your day-to-day work, so that for other similar junctions you can also do the same, or for the district councils to consider this to see if there are other solutions? That's point number 1. And second, well, for this particular junction is a crossroad, and you also said that after the completion of the footbridge system, the at-grade crossing will be cancelled. Well, for this particular crossroad, very often you would have traffic signals to control them, and there would also be idling time. So there would be another demand to ask you to reopen or recommission the traffic signal system. So for crossroads like this, once a footbridge system is completed, does that mean that the traffic signaling system will also be cancelled in order to ensure that there will be smoother traffic?
What are the actual changes? Yes. If we remove the pedestrian crossing, there will be an improvement in surface traffic. When we remove the traffic lights, the pedestrian will be railed off. Yes, I understand. I'm asking the traffic flow. What are the changes to traffic flow? Because I have requested those statistics but haven't seen it. Now, we are estimating that there will be different projects, for example, in Site 6. So when we estimate traffic flow, if we don't make the change, the roadside will be more congested. But when we remove the pedestrian crossing, the traffic control can be adjusted so the vehicles from different directions will have more crossing time. Because if we save the pedestrian crossing, that time can be given for vehicle use. Chairman, my question was not answered. We now have different pedestrian crossings in different sections. So I'm asking, if we have a bridge, the traffic control management, will it be different? Will we see actual improvements rather than we have different sections along the crossroads? Ms. Pan? Put simply, yes, we will improve the situation. Do you have statistics? Thank you, Chairman. Currently, the traffic flow, if we have a traffic island for pedestrian crossing, and if we remove the pedestrian crossing, the accessibility, if we don't remove the crossing, if we keep the pedestrian crossing, we will have a negative figure in 2031. But if we remove the crossing, it will be positive. So the pedestrian crossings are not, there is a traffic island in the middle. So my question is, if we have a bridge, will we have significant time savings if you have a bridge? Given such a specific question, we need to look into that. So the bridge on Tonkin Street already has a bridge built there. It's in use, and the crossing facilities have been removed. So we can draw some reference from that experience and provide some actual information. So you can supplement that information via a paper. Can they answer one question? I can queue again. Mr. Ho Jifeng, I'm concerned about the exterior design. The reason for these questions, we have a lot of bridges across the territory. They are now being caged, and the items that we're scrutinizing, if we look at the design, it seems that it's not enclosed. It has sufficient ventilation. So I want to confirm, are you going to abide by the design, or will it be caged and enclosed? We do have a design, an exterior design. Who did the design? Will the subhead figure be listed? Is it under the consultant fee? I'd like to clarify that. And third, there has to be a design theme. Some people will say that if it's caged, it affects fire safety and so on. The design in the paper, has it considered fire safety, evacuation requirements and so on? Or will you have additions in the future? Or will you be adding a cage during construction? If you make additions in the future, will you consult the district council and LegCo? So design questions. Ms. Pang, our design, as indicated in the diagram, we have a bridge completed in Tonkin Street. It is open, it's not enclosed, and you can take a look and compare that to our photograph. You can say it's similar or even the same. Regarding the consultant fee, we had commissioned a consultant, and in paragraph 26, we have a consultant fee that did the design. Regarding fire safety, we comply with all fire safety regulations. They did not answer whether they will consider adding cages later in the future. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding this item, we don't have a design for a cage. So in the design, you say it complies with fire safety requirements. It's not a cage. It's not an enclosure. Is that a fire safety requirement, Ms. Pang? Thank you. The bridge has stairs. It's not an enclosed bridge, so we don't have major fire safety requirements. It's also in compliance. Well, then the caged bridges that we see, does that mean it's not in compliance with fire safety requirements, Ms. Pang? Thank you. I'm responsible for this project. I don't have information regarding other bridges. Is there a standard? You won't have standards for new territories and standards for anywhere else? Or do you have no standards? Thank you. You can see there are different bridge designs. We will communicate with different departments. Do you have a uniform standard? We do have engineering guidelines. Will you promise that you won't have cage designs? That is not ideal. Could you give us a solemn promise? Thank you. I said just now, Regarding this PWSC item, we don't have that design. There's no pledge. Mr. Vincent Chang, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. On the last occasion, we had a lengthy discussion. It was before Christmas, and I had interviewed residents in the community. The original intention was, I believe, to make traffic smoother along some long road. So we need some statistics. How much, by what percentage will traffic improve? Now, Hoi Lai residents don't have any benefit. They have to walk an extra distance. They could cross. They used to have a pedestrian crossing, but now they have to use a bridge. So it's not it's not good news for them. So Hoi Lai residents, they have to take the MTR in Nam Chung station. They had asked, could they have a covered walkway access to Hoi Lai shopping mall? There was no response. So could you promise to give Hoi Lai residents a covered walkway? Thank you, Chairman. Regarding the previous suggestion, we have been following up that. Initially, once the bridge is completed, our pedestrian walkway, there are conditions that can allow for a covered walkway. It is technically feasible, and we will follow up the details. But if they want to cross the road, there is a height restriction. It has to allow buses to access, so we might not be able to build a cover. So we need to liaise to see whether we can build more covers. Does that mean you cannot have seamless access? But could you build some covers so that there is shelter from the elements? We will look at the whole basket of suggestions, and we will follow up on that. Thank you. Fernando Chung, 1 minute. Previously, we had expressed concern regarding 3 bridges at the 3 sections, and officials have been saying that it is a traffic control measure. They want to remove the pedestrian crossing, so they need to build a bridge. But I asked, and Ms. Pang said the pedestrian crossing facilities, they have to include a traffic island, and it's a 4-lane highway on both sides. So they feel that given this width, they need to build a bridge. So there are 2 different arguments I want to clarify. Is it because you need to build a traffic island, so you want to build a bridge, or is it because the highway is 4 lanes wide? Or do you want to remove the pedestrian traffic lights to improve traffic control? So what is the reason? Thank you, Chairman. When we consider the bridge system, we have to consider pedestrian safety and vehicle safety. So after building the bridge, we can allow motorists more time to use the road. It can help them shorten the travel time through this cross-section crossroads. So there are 2 considerations. If we want to maintain the pedestrian crossing, then we will have less green light time for vehicles because we need to set aside time for pedestrians. The reason why we cannot have a direct pedestrian crossing is because we cannot allow so much time for pedestrians. So that is not ideal. Well, if that's the case, then you need to give us some standards. It's unimaginable that you explain, you give this explanation for this scenario. Well, then how many crossings in Hong Kong do we need to have bridges? How many four-lane highways do we have where you need to remove the pedestrian crossing and build bridges? I think they've given quite a lengthy explanation. But do they have standards? They have different factors, and after considering them, they come up with this plan. Well, then they should give us a comprehensive standard. Thank you, Chairman. Individual crossings have their different considerations. There's a different traffic control management system. Do they need to turn left or turn right? Each crossing is different. So we will take your suggestion and convey that back to the traffic department, to the highways department. Thank you, Chairman. Well, that means there's no standard. Well, just now Ms. Pang had explained, currently this project has considered different factors, and so everything, it's not just one basket of considerations. Doesn't mean that having a traffic island is not ideal, and we have to convert that into bridges. They have to consider different factors. We're using public funds. There are no standards, Mr. Fernando Chung. I will give Ms. Pang some extra time to explain.
Ms. Pang, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member, for your question. In fact, the criteria is very simple. That is, well, we don't want to see any traffic congestion, and then pedestrians will be safe. So on these two criteria, we have to look at what facilities will be needed. So it's not just about whether or not we need to have a footbridge, or whether or not we have to have a safety island and so on. So we have to look at the circumstances on the ground in making the decision. Thank you. Next, Claudia Mo, asking for the third time, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd just like to clarify this. Well, with a set of escalator to replace one of the lifts. So instead of having the lift, can you have an escalator in terms of construction cost and also the operating cost every year? Will that be somewhat lower? And also for the escalator, when compared to a lift, the merit is that is running. And then for those who are at a rush, well, they can just stand still. And then for people who are pressed for time, then they can just walk up on one side of the escalator. But then if it's a lift, then they will have to wait there in a queue for the lift to move up and down. So in terms of crowd control or pedestrian control of pedestrian flow, will an escalator be somewhat better? Ms. Pang, thank you for your question. In fact, in designing to have a lift, the biggest consideration is to provide a barrier-free access. That is for people who are not able or who should not be using escalators because of their own circumstances. For example, for the wheelchair-bound, and also for people pulling a trolley, or even elderly people using a walking stick. Or sometimes they might have difficulty using an escalator. So in installing this lift system is to provide a barrier-free access. But then you have a total of 7 lifts. So we all know that in a city, well, for people with a trolley and so on, of course, they have to use a lift instead of an escalator, because a lift is less convenient. But then I'm just saying that one of the lifts can be cancelled and replaced with a set of escalators. So why can't that be considered? Because that would be more convenient. Well, in the design, they've already got escalators, but of course we're not having escalators on all 4 sides or 4 junctions. Yes, Ms. Pang. Yes, thank you, Ms. Mo, for your suggestion. In fact, in our supplementary information paper, we have already explained very fully the reason why we have to have so many lifts. And in the paper, we have also explained that a basket of factors have been considered. In fact, for the footbridge system, upon its completion, we're going to cancel the pedestrian crossing at grade. And also near the pedestrian crossing, there are welfare facilities and public facilities. So other than providing for accessibility, and we hope that the waiting time for these lifts will not be too long. And also, in the event that one of the lifts is under repair, then there are alternative lifts available. So we believe that the number of lifts is appropriate. Next, Helena Wong asking for the first time, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. For this set of footbridge, the DP's district councillors have been contacted, and we have also collected views from the local residents. On the whole, we support this, and we hope that it can be built as soon as possible. But then, for this set of footbridge at Shamong Road and Tonkin Street, it's been completed and commissioned, and for the Yen Chow Street West, in the future, we're going to have a similar set of footbridge system. But then for that one, it has not been put in the queue, and it has not been considered by the development panel. So I'd like to know the timeline for that. Yes, Ms. Pang. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Wong, for your question. With regard to the Yen Chow Street footbridge system, we are dealing with some gazettal issues, and once it's gazetted, we'll be going to the development panel to get member support for the funding proposal. But do you have a timetable, Ms. Pang? Yes, thank you for your question. Well, we hope to do that within this session, but then it depends on the queue. Thank you. Next, many members have already asked you this, but then apparently the administration has not been able to answer the questions. What is a policy issue rather than the design on the ground? The thing is, if you were to build this set of footbridge system, you must have done a traffic impact assessment, and you must have assessed the need from the local community. Yes, you do have some housing estates, and there are also some 10 schools nearby, and therefore both the pedestrian flow and traffic flow would be very high. You must have done those beforehand, but then without this footbridge network, to what extent will it affect the traffic flow and also the pedestrian flow? How much longer do they have to travel? So why can't you provide the information in writing? I believe that that information is very important. Ms. Pang? Yes, thank you for your questions. Well, for these figures, in fact, in para 10 of our paper, we have already submitted that. And there is also a hyperlink. You can also make use of the hyperlink to browse the details. Yes, any further questions? Chairman? Right now, well, towards the seaside is a new development area. And we have also found out that, well, near Hoi Ying Estate, there is a footbridge connecting with number 6 construction site, but then it doesn't just stop there. For example, if you go to Nam Chang Station or Lai Chi Kok, this set of footbridge system will also provide connectivity to the pedestrians, and also going to the Aquamarine and also Lai Chi Kok or even Hoi Lai Estate. According to what I got from local district councillors, residents would like to have the footbridge completed as soon as possible. So please do provide us with the figures so that we can implement the scheme as soon as possible. Okay? So members would like to have better connectivity within the district. Next, Helena Wong, asking for the second time, 3 minutes. Yes, I'd like to follow up on a question asked by Fernando Zhang earlier. It's a policy issue. What I'd like to know is, there are bound to be residents who don't like to use the footbridge system, and they'd like to keep the at-grade crossing, in particular for the wheelchair-bound and also for the elderly residents. So, can you tell us the policy consideration on what circumstances would all the at-grade crossings be cancelled, or under what circumstances will you be prepared to keep them? I'm sure the Development Bureau must have a very clear set of standards so that residents can be informed as to why in a particular district all the at-grade crossings will be cancelled. For example, in West Kowloon near the WKCD and also near the Kowloon Station. In fact, even along Jordan Road, there are no longer any at-grade crossings. Still is quite convenient. And then for the footbridge, yes, there is a footbridge nearby, but then it's not really connecting both sides, because on one side you have the lifts, and then on the other side there is sun. And then after you have completed such a footbridge system, and if you just cancel all the at-grade crossings, it's not that convenient. So can you keep some of them? And also in new development areas, where there are 3 or 4 lanes on both sides, and then if you have to cross a very wide road with a particular number of lanes, then you would prefer to have footbridge system instead of at-grade crossings. So can you explain that to us? Yes, Ms. Ho, thank you for your question. In determining whether or not we'd be building a footbridge, and then upon the completion of the footbridge, we are going to cancel the at-grade crossing, I wouldn't say that it's a very complicated consideration process, but then it has to be interactive. We have to look at the traffic flow at grade, and also when pedestrians use these pedestrian crossings, what's the pedestrian flow? And using this footbridge as an example, Ms. Wong said that we had a TIA, a traffic impact assessment, and by 2031, if we keep the at-grade pedestrian crossing, then Shamwong Road will be very congested. And that led us to think that if we didn't want that to continue, then what could be done? And one of the options would be to cancel the at-grade pedestrian crossing. But then if we were to cancel it, then we have to have a footbridge in its stead, so that pedestrians can be brought up to the footbridge, so that within the district they can shuttle between different areas. And if that had to be done, then the footbridge system would have to be as convenient as possible. As to under what circumstances would the at-grade crossing be cancelled, does that mean that the road has to have 3 or 4 lanes on each side before that will be cancelled? I don't think we can just say this across the board. We have to look at the merits of individual cases. For example, all right, if the design is that we have 3 or 4 lanes on each side, then the traffic flow in the future will be quite high according to our projection. But then does that mean that would that be saturated in the foreseeable future? That would also depend on the traffic flow and also the growth in traffic volume. Yes, I understand that members would like us to come clean on this. For example, what are the criteria, what are the factors to be taken into account? But then it would be hard to say that, if we have factors A, B, and C, we would definitely do this. It's not like that. Next, Eunice Chen, 3 minutes. Yes, to follow up on what Mr. Chen Wing-shen just asked, I hope that the administration can be more specific on this. Well, if you look at enclosure 2, I can see that for this particular project, precisely is at Hoi Lai Estate, and if it's to be connected to the westbound of Heng Hua Street, is quite segregated, so it's segmentized. But then on the other side of the project is to be connected with Aquamarine, and also to the secondary school, and also the West Kowloon Reclamation. But then at Hoi Lai Estate, according to what the Deputy Secretary just said, it's not that convenient because you'd like to bring all the pedestrians up to the footbridge, but then there is no reason why from Hoi Lai Estate all the way to the connecting point that is near the St. Mary's Church, Mok Heng New College. There is no connection. So there are so many residents there. So you have to think about this from the user's perspective. So it's just one section less. But then in your proposal, you've only taken care of the footbridge. What about the very short connection between the landing and also the estate? Just now, Ms. Pang also said that, it's possible for you to build a covered walkway. But then can you extend it just a little bit? Instead of doing this in this fragmented manner, you will have to think about it from the user's perspective. Yes, Ms. Pang? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your question. As I've said, initially, we have to look at the alignment. Yes, there might be space available.
Along the pedestrian sidewalk, there are different facilities. So will we be obstructing machinery into the power station and so on? So we will follow up, but we do see there is space roadside. Actually, the legislator is correct. It connects to 3 residential developments, Hoi Lai Chun, Bek Hoi Lam Tin, and Site 6. The bridge can extend to the residential development. It's only in Hoi Lai Chun where one section is broken off. And as Ms. Pang said, we had examined that. So from Mok Heng Yu Secondary School, if we build a covered facility, technically it's feasible, but it will straddle a power substation. We have to confirm that the works with CLP, but we don't see major technical difficulties. But the pedestrian crossing, as Ms. Pang had explained, and then over to Hoi Lai Shopping Mall, we will have to coordinate with Housing Department. If everything can be resolved, we hope that this can be covered in the bridge project. That's a very positive note. Mr. Junius Ho. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the Permanent Secretary, in Sumwong Road, Heng Hua Street West, and Bek Hoi Lam Tin, we are examining the footbridge facility there. But if you look at Annex 2 on Tonkin Street and Sumwong Road, there is another footbridge. We see there are construction sites, and on Cheong Fat Street, Site 2, there is a development there, and on 8, 9, and 10, there are the developments there. We also have a large West Kowloon Reclamation area. So all these overhead pedestrian bridges are very mature. They divide the surface traffic. That's a trend. That's a healthy development. But when we build, in the past I said we shouldn't do it on an ad hoc basis. There should be a comprehensive planning. What will the overall situation be? Will it meet future demand? If I look at Annex 1, we have these steel cages. If it is connected, will there be air conditioning for people who are going to work or going home? It should be comfortable. First of all, Chairman, I support this item. 300 million is not expensive, even though it has been criticized. Why do we have contingencies and expensive consultant fees? After we pay that, we don't see any extra benefit. But in this case, the elevated walkway, we should do a better job. We should make them connected better. In West Kowloon Reclamation, there's a large residential development. How do we avoid going to the surface level? We have a lot of people going to the courts. If the elevated walkways are connected, then it's more comfortable. So I want to raise 2 points for the permanent secretary. The elevated walkway, we should have a comprehensive plan. We shouldn't just consider one pedestrian crossing. That's my first point. The second point, the consultant fees. They need to come up with better ideas. They've spent the money, but we don't get anything. We don't get much in return. Who can respond? Thank you. Regarding the comfort of the pedestrian bridges, we've considered that. We don't have an enclosed space. It's open. So even though it's a simple design, we do have some green landscaping. So it's made as comfortable as can be. So the 3 bridges, there is some interconnection. So we hope that it can connect major school facilities, public interchanges, some community facilities, and Namcheong's station. We also need solar facilities. The rooftop of the bridge could implement solar panels. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the follow-up. Regarding solar panels, we're working with Highways Department. We're conducting a pilot program. We're testing the solar panels. We want high efficiency solar panel. Mr. Wu Jiwai. Then Mr. Alvin Young. Thank you, Chairman. I want to ask the government, do we have energy saving facilities? Can we have suspension of elevator services late at night? Because if we have 2 elevators, they will be operating 24 hours. But since you're giving people so much choice, can you shut down one elevator late at night to save energy? We do make energy considerations. If our travel laters, if nobody's using it, first of all, it will slow down. And late at night, we have communicated with the repair and maintenance crew that we can set timers. We can shut down the travel laters to save energy. Regarding elevators, if it's not used, it will shut off ventilation and so on. It will save energy. Fernando Chung, 1 minute. These footbridges, it's to facilitate the residents and pedestrians. Usually we support them, but on some long road we have 3 large bridges. So we need to ask Why does it need to be built this way? The government response originally was that traffic flow needs to be improved, so they need to remove all the surface pedestrian crossings and build these footbridges. Then we asked, give us some statistics. What's the big deal about traffic flow? There's congestion on the left, on the right. How can you improve it by just improving the traffic on one lane? Well, the government gave no response, and then you say the pedestrians have to cross the roads in different sections, and for their safety, we need to build bridges. Then I asked, what are the standards? If the road is wide, does that mean we need a bridge? Then, for all the roads that have this width in Hong Kong, do they need bridges? And they say no. So ultimately, they say each crossing is unique. Each case has to be considered individually. So, Chairman, how am I supposed to consider the funding application? There's no statistics, no standard. We have 3 crossing sections, and we need to build 3 big bridges. Is it necessary? Where's the principle in the funding applications? Could we allow rational discussion in this subcommittee? Well, you have to raise a specific question. Give us some standards. It's a repetitive question about standards. Thank you, Chairman. If you examine the statistics, as I mentioned, we have done a traffic impact assessment study. The information that we gathered was these 3 pedestrian crossings, if they are kept at the crossroads, then Summong Road in 2031, it will be saturated, and that invited us to consider different options. And could we remove the roadside pedestrian crossing? Could we build bridges? Could that resolve the problem? That seems to be one feasible option, but that gives rise to another benefit. We see that along Summong Road, there's more and more vehicular traffic. We have pedestrians and motorists in competition. As Ms. Pang said, it's a 4-lane highway. So either I give more time for motorists or I give more time for pedestrians. So during busy peak season, peak time, it's hard to strike a balance. For example, in the morning when we have students, they jaywalk. So we've considered many factors, I understand. You want us to have a standard, but for these unique scenarios, how many lanes the road has, what is the estimated capacity, the traffic flow, what is the pedestrian foot flow. There are many factors at play, so it's hard to give you a simple, objective standard. We will do this under certain circumstances and so on. Mr. Wu Ji-White. The situation that has been described, of course, invites us to investigate further. When we have different pedestrian crossings at different sections of a crossroad, well, I hope that after today's discussion, the officials can undertake a comprehensive investigation for all cross sections in Hong Kong, because as the annex says, we have a lot of people stuck on the traffic island. So there are only 2 options. Either you build a bridge or you either enlarge the traffic island. Otherwise you will have long-standing safety issues in the community. So that comes back to my first question. Will the government conduct a comprehensive study regarding improvement works on pedestrian crossing? And then we can have grounds for improvement. Secretary, we can take the issue back to Transport Housing Bureau and the Highways Department. I think the district councils are dealing with urgent cases, but we're willing to have a discussion with Highways, and as the member said, could we come up with a more uniform approach, or could we deal with priority cases regarding these pedestrian crossings, and we can consider the way forward. Yes, we can contact Highways. Will you report back on your findings, or is there any mechanism for further discussion? We can provide a written response, but we cannot follow up in PWSC. It has to be done in a relevant panel. We heard about questions about bridge design, and you've promised that there would be an opportunity to follow up in the subcommittee. And Mr. Wu Jiwai's question, actually, it occurs frequently, I recall, in the district council.
Well, when I was still a Sha Tin district council member, there were also crossing facilities being discussed, and some residents complained that they had to wait for too long a time. And we also talked about adjusting the traffic signaling system and also the facing, but then that was not sufficient to solve the problems. So I think what the other honorable member said was appropriate, but then it has to be taken up by the panel. Yes, Mr. Junius Ho, 3 minutes. Yes, I'd like to clarify this. Well, 332 CL is a very massive project. It's about the West Kowloon Reclamation, but then we're talking about the main works or the remainder of the main works. Well, I think that started in 1989, and basically most of the facilities have been completed, and now what you're trying to do is to complete the remaining works, in particular the pedestrian footbridge system. So the whole project has been there for a long time, and there has been a lot of consultation. And other than 332 CL, so we are talking about paper 16, and in enclosure 2, it has to do with Tonkin Street and also Yen Chow Street. So there are 2 more footbridges that are coming on stream. So can you tell us whether or not those 2 footbridges have been approved or not? Yes, Ms. Peng. Thank you for your question. For the 3 sets of footbridges, that's the remaining works in the West Kowloon Reclamation. And after completing the 3 sets of footbridge system, basically we have already completed all the remaining works. As to Tonkin Street's junction, it's been open to the public since late last year. So the footbridge at the junction has been commissioned. And then for the remaining one, that's the sidewalk and also the Yen Chow Street footbridge, that will also be constructed once the Gazetto procedures are completed. Thank you. What about the other 2 footbridges? Are they going to cost more or less the same? That is about $300 million. Yes, thank you for your question. Well, for the Tonkin Street footbridge, when compared to the Heng Hua Street footbridge, the cost is more or less the same. For the Yen Chow Street, we are doing the detailed design and we'll be giving you the estimates. But then given the geology is very similar, and therefore I believe that the cost would be more or less the same. So it's going to cost about $1 billion. So you've already got the Tonkin Street footbridge is already commissioned, and you're already doing the second and the third is coming on stream. So you can also show this to our colleagues, because it has a long history, and you're just completing the remaining works. And then you're talking about 3 junctions, and you've already completed 1, you're doing the second, and then you have the criteria established long before. and it's not something new. So you can just show this to the other members so that they don't have to repeat the questions. I think you've already explained yourself. There is no need for you to clarify. I'd just like to clarify the details. Yes, Helena Wong asking for the third time, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to know that for this particular footbridge, so you're trying to have great separated facilities for pedestrians and road traffic. So with or without this footbridge, the TIA has been done, and the administration referred me to para 10. I've already read this, but then with regard to the TIA, with or without the footbridge, what's the impact on the traffic flow? How much faster are they going to travel? Or is it going to be slower and so on? Well, we can't see that in the paper. So before the FC meeting, can you give us the data as to your projections? That's point number one. And number two, well, with the great separation, yes, pedestrians will be connected from Hoi Lai Estate all the way to the number 6 construction site, or even all the way to the Nam Chang Park and Nam Chang Station. There is no need for them to walk up and down. I think this is good. But then what I'd like to know is about the ancillary facilities. First, I'm concerned that the footbridge has to be accessible by dogs, right? So dogs should be allowed, because with the park there, residents with dogs would also be going there. So have you, would you be having dog droppings, collection box, and also how are they going to be collected and cleansed? And also for the footbridges materials, in many cases you use glass panels and so on, but then the effect is that the heat insulation and also for the shading from sunlight is very poor. Well, for the cleansing of the footbridge, well, the FEHD will be responsible for maintaining the cleanliness, and if dogs have to use our footbridge, it's the same as they use the pavement. So Dr. Helena Wong's views would also be forwarded to the FEHD, whether or not they have to have dog droppings, collection facilities, and so on. That will also be done. As to whether or not it's going to be exposed to the sun, no more than 1/3 of the footbridge will have glass panels as covers. But then we expect that in the center part, what is not going to be translucent, and also there'll be semi-transparent glass panels that will be installed, so that when there is sunlight, it's not going to be too hot. Claudia Mo asking for the fourth time, 1 minute. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like them to supplement. All right, in our urban design, you're trying to have great separated crossings so that you can facilitate traffic flow, and then for pedestrians, well, they'll have to defend them, or they'll have to defend themselves. Well, in Tsim Sha Tsui, from the Space Museum to the Peninsula Hotel, why is it that they have to go or cross the road via the subway, and then you're trying to benefit the shop operators, and then you tell them that the at-grade service can only be used by the traffic or the vehicles. Well, you might say that I'm digressing, but then as an objective assessment, is that the case? Because obviously you have made some subjective judgment, and therefore when questioned, you have to come up with a more comprehensive and clear idea. You can't say that you've already objectively looked at everything and then this is the best solution. I don't think it's good enough, because as far as we are concerned, that's not fair. Thank you. Okay, on the design of the footbridge and the considerations, I've already repeated that. They will have to go to the relevant panel for detailed discussions. Claudia Mo also made a suggestion, so can you give a very brief response? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Mo, for your question. Well, for the 3 sets of footbridge as we said in the past, well, this community has its own characteristics. We have many schools and we have many public facilities. In particular, we have traffic interchange and also the MTR Nam Chong station. We also have some major parks. And therefore, once this is completed, that would increase the convenience for people to go out. Yes, Tanya Chen, 1 minute, asking for the 5th time. Yes, we are all for the accessibility for people. But then I've been reflecting on myself and also the design of this footbridge. It's not just about 1 or 2 junctions. You're talking about 3 junctions altogether. And you're talking about 3 very important junctions with heavy pedestrian and traffic flows. And if all the at-grade pedestrian crossings are cancelled, then Chairman, of course, we would not assume that there would be a total blackout or that all the lifts and escalators will be put to a halt. Is that appropriate? And also for one particular junction, if you have to use an alternative lift, you have to travel a distance of 100 meters and so on, then assuming that if the footbridge is no longer in use or cannot be used, then does that mean that pedestrians or residents will have difficulty going out and or that they cannot cross the roads properly? Yes, I understand that you're trying to make sure that there be great separation between the pedestrians and traffic, but then if you have a great pedestrian crossing as a fallback, then for 3 junctions, actually, you're talking about 5 junctions if you take into account the vicinity facilities. If you just rely on the footbridge connection, is it appropriate? You're talking about some 5 footbridges because you have 5 junctions and then you're trying to connect them all. Then you're talking about a very extended footbridge system to replace the existing at-grade crossing. Is that appropriate? And also, Chairman, you're right in saying that in the future, we hope that we can go back to the panel for discussion because we are seeing more and more such footbridges and the construction cost is getting higher and higher. I hope that there can be an in-depth discussion at a panel. And if at all possible, can you also write to the panel so that we can discuss it as soon as possible? I don't think we need to write to them because just now the Secretary General said that after the meeting they'd be following up on this and they'd be going back to the panel in due course. Okay, you've expressed your views. And both Claudia Mo and Tanya Chen raised some questions, and I repeatedly said that that should be discussed. But then today we have to deal with this funding proposal. Next, Eddie Chu, asking for the 2nd time, 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I tried to look at the information paper provided by the administration and also the TIA. I'd like the administration to explain this. When I look at the report on page 13 of the TIA, they have a table, and it's about 2031. The pedestrian forecast. Well, if you have not looked at it, you might not be able to understand. But then once you looked at them, well, by 2031, for the 3 sets of pedestrian footbridges, there is a huge discrepancy for Tonkin Street and also Shamong Road. Well, the junction would indeed have a very huge demand. They expect that there will be 158,600 pedestrians trips. And then for Hinghwa Street and Sambong Road, you're talking about some 30,400 pedestrian trips. And then for Yanchao Street is 45,900 trips. So you're talking about a 5 times difference in terms of pedestrian flow by 2031. But then if you look at the footbridge, it's exactly the same. The 3 sets look exactly the same. And then there are many things that we have argued for a long time. And I think Fernando Cheung made a very valid point just now. Because for the footbridge in the center, there is a clear demand for this. But then on both sides of it, on the left and right of it, is it really that necessary? And second, In the same paper, on page 16, it says that with or without the footbridge, and also with or without the safety island, you're talking about 3 scenarios. The difference in the traffic flow, and of course we're talking about 2031. I noticed that for the reserve capacity for Hinghwa Street and Shamwang Road, even with the footbridge, the existing junction layout would have 9% and 37% of reserve capacity. And of course, I noticed that for the other 2 junctions, there would be a negative figure. So what I'd like to know is, do you have any assessments? That is, what if you just build the middle one without the 2 on both sides? Then what about the projections? So what about the reserve capacity for the traffic flow? Do you have those figures? Yes, Ms. Pang. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chu, for your question. At every junction, because of the distance, we have to look at the traffic flow at each and every of those junctions without one set of the footbridge. And if you keep the grade crossing, then if one junction, well, there is also this VC issue, that is and there you cannot just consider one footbridge in isolation. And also on page 16, if you look at the table, it has already indicated the situation.
We have to handle traffic flow. We have to avoid conflict between pedestrian and motorists. We cannot cross directly. So we need a traffic island, a safety island. And even though there's a positive figure, it's a small positive figure. In fact, the diagram indicates when pedestrians cross, it's very congested. So we need to improve pedestrian accessibility and traffic flow. Mr. Jiang Chongtai. Thank you, Chairman. I want to follow up on the previous government response. We see that under what conditions will the government consider building a travel later? But if you look at the diagram, we see in the nearby secondary schools, there are 2 groups of automatic travelators in orange and covered walkways, covered travelators. One connects to Aquamarine. I think that should be the shopping mall exit. On the other side, we have Site 6, the reclamation area. Regarding the information that you have on hand, over at Aquamarine, there is an elevator facility. So in that private development, will they have more than just a private elevator? And in Site 6, the reclamation area, in this private development, will the developers will they be in communication regarding the provision of elevators? Because we have some surface pedestrian crossings that will be blocked. So that means in these 4 corners, aside from travelators and elevators, I want to know, in these 2 private developments, will they consider automatic travelators? And on the other side, we don't know what the situation is there. Could you provide some more information? How will they coordinate with your design? Well, we had discussed this in the previous meeting. Regarding Site 6, it's a housing department site. We are in communication with them. They have travelators. So in that corner, we won't provide a duplicate facility. We will be deploying the housing department's facilities. Aquamarine, they have automatic travelators, so we won't be building travelators there. Regarding the housing department site, one private development, they have to provide access during certain hours. So at night, will there be a scenario where pedestrians can't reach the surface level? Regarding Site 6, they will have a 24-hour access connecting to the 3 bridges. So you don't have to worry not being able to get to your destination. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't aware of Mr. Wu Jiwai's question. I think he asked, after building the 3 bridges, the motorist green light, will it be extended substantially? So you might not have these figures, but I would like to confirm that you would provide these figures later. I want to extend my question. I don't understand Ms. Pang's response. If we have 3 sets of footbridges, what are the benefits of dividing pedestrian traffic and motor traffic? Well, if you build 1 bridge, if you build 3 bridges, you will even further divide the traffic. But it seems that if I just build 1 bridge, it's almost ineffective. So I'd like Ms. Pang to confirm that. Thank you for the question. Well, just now I explained, if you look at the different crossings and the congestion, the pedestrian motorist sharing of road space, if you look at the traffic flow, we consider all these factors in designing bridges. So for example, in the Tonkin Street Bridge, it has more traffic. How do we deal with that? That's why we need to confirm the traffic flow, and the bridge width will be considered. So in some bridges on Tonkin Street, it has to be wider to allow for access. So in different crossings, we have different arrangements. Will you provide the figures regarding the traffic light? Thank you. We can provide supplemental information on how we fine-tune the green light, traffic light. Ms. Claudia Mo. This bridge system has a daily projected flow of 44,000. Since it's so heavily used, I want to repeat, your professionals, just from a common sense and logic point of view, would adding a travelator be an improvement or ineffective? Could we replace an elevator with a travelator? Well, you said it's barrier-free access. Well, I think you will be creating the opposite effect. People will be waiting at the elevator. So people who are in wheelchairs and pushing baby prams they will be excluded. So I think this question is repeated. You said that there are travelators on both sides. I'm asking for an extra travelator. Well, on Aquamarine, they do have other facilities. Chairman, could you let me add a little bit? In the traffic panel, we had some projects connecting to MTR where we only had elevators, and we found that it couldn't catch up with demand, and you had to add travelators. Ms. Pang, if Ms. Mo refers to enclosure 1, we do have provision of travelators towards tucked-in. Yes, I see that. I'm saying in proportion, if you have an extra travelator and one less elevator. Thank you for the follow-up. The travelators can meet a large number of pedestrian demand. So even without an extra travelator, we can handle the traffic. So I don't see why we need an extra set of travelators at this section. Fernando Chung. Chairman, I want to ask, these 3 groups of footbridges, before and after completion, will traffic speed be amended? What is the current speed limit? Thank you, Mr. Chung. Samong Road, it's urban speed limit. The speed limit, well, whether they can achieve that is separate. The upper limit is 50 kilometers per hour. I'm saying, is there going to be any change before and after the bridge? Will the speed limit be changed? The traffic has to be controlled by traffic lights. Of course, when they stop and go, it will take time, and we want to maintain a higher speeds overall, but the speed limit is still 50 kilometers. I'm asking whether it would be any change, and she said no. So is it 50 kilometers for the whole Samong Road? This is the typical urban speed limit. If there are no questions, let's put it to the vote. Those in favor, PWSC 2019-2016 West Kowloon remaining projects, please raise your hand. You want to call for a division bell.
好，而家進行表決。
Okay, please proceed to the vote. Before I declare the close of the vote, please verify your votes.
好，現在停止。
All right, voting is closed, and the results will be displayed. 28 present, 26 for, 1 objection, no abstention. So the motion is passed. So is there any request for this to be singled out for separate voting at the FC meeting? All right, Tanya Chan suggested it. Okay, let's move on. Item 3, 2020-2021 Capital Works Reserve Fund, paper number PWSC 2019 to 2023. Members are invited to recommend to the FC and to approve a total allocation of $22.3505 billion for 2020-2021 for the block allocations under the CWRF, and also to increase the approved allocation for 2019 and 20. Fernando Jiang, let me complete. So let me introduce the paper. I'll be giving you the time to speak. The administration already submitted an overall table with regard to the breakdowns for 2020-2021 on the 4th of December 2019 to the PWSC. That's in paper PWSC 41-01. With regard to the funding proposal set out in the paper, on the 26th of November 2019, the administration already consulted the development panel, and the GCIO also submitted its proposal on Head 701 Computerization Program, subhead A007GX, new administration computer system on the 11th of November, and it consulted the ITBP, and also the THB also consulted the transfer panel on subhead 706 highways, subhead 6101TX on the Universal Accessibility Program on the 15th of November 2019. That is the transport panel. So given the fact that we have a long list of government officials attending the meeting, that's why I'm not going to read out the names individually. Yes, Eddie Chu, point of order. Yes, well, the FC's practice is that when we discuss the civil service pay rise, the Secretary for the Civil Service would also be present, and the Commissioner for Police argued that he should not be present. But then you're talking about the CWRF. Well, 10 members have already written to ask that the Security Bureau and also the police be represented. But then we received a reply saying that the police force is not a controlling officer. That's why they are not going to be represented here. So can you clarify? All right, we have so many departments represented here. So are all of them controlling officers? No, that's not true, according to my understanding. And given the fact that they are not controlling officers, they can also help us in our discussion in answering members' questions. How come the police force can be exempted? Well, the PWSC's general arrangement in discussing funding proposals is that the controlling officers will be present to answer our questions, and of course, policy-wise, we would also have permanent secretaries or deputy secretaries would also be present to help us to understand the overall financial arrangements. For example, the deputy secretary from the FSTB would also be regularly present. Well, I can give you some examples. For example, the SWD's assistant director, I'm sure he or she is not the controlling officer, but still, he or she will still be present whenever there are questions in relation to welfare facilities. But then for the police, they are the regular users, and we received many complaints. That is residents or citizens have been beaten up in police stations, and now you have detention centers and so on. How are they going to use them? So who is going to answer the question? So will the ASD know how the police officers are beating up protesters and detainees? Well, it has to do with the overall funding proposal from the CWRF. We are the PWSC, and we are supposed to discuss funding issues. But then for policy issues, you have to go back to the relevant panel for discussion. But then if members would like to invite certain officials to come along to discuss issues with them, then I think the most important thing is whether or not the questions can be answered by the officials present. And Mr. Eddie Chu, you raised a point. Should we be a little more patient? So let's see how things go. Chairman, does that mean that if they are not able to answer the questions, well, if officials are not able to answer questions in relation to the police force, you would also help us by inviting the police to come along. Is that right? Well, if you need certain officials to come along, and if you'd like to invite them, yes, we can discuss that. But then it doesn't mean that at this very moment we can come to a conclusion as to whether or not a certain official, that is the CP, has to come. So what I'm suggesting is that we should discuss the issues first, and then we'll decide if we need to invite certain officials to come. Is it also a point of order? I don't quite understand what you said. I don't quite get you. Well, it doesn't matter because I've already clearly expressed my view as the chairman of the PWSC. You did not spell out the criteria under which you would be inviting the CP to come along. You just asked me to be patient. So I've been very patient with you. Okay? In the process of our deliberation, if you raise a pertinent question and yet the officials present are not able to answer the question, then there are several ways to deal with them. For example, they can also forward the question to the relevant departments that are not represented here in order to get hold of information to answer your questions. And if you still think that you need to invite certain officials to come along, then we can discuss that. And of course, that decision would also have to be decided by the subcommittee as a whole. Mr. Ray Chan, all right, the government's letter is that, well, only controlling officers will come to answer our questions. But then, if you look at PWSC work procedures 16, it says that the chairman of the PWSC can invite any government official or even NGO or members of NGOs to come. So it boils down to representatives from NGOs so that they can explain issues to us, or they can also present papers and information to us. Apparently, Chairman, you've confirmed what the administration said, only controlling officers would come. So can you tell us? Or can the FSTB explain to us? Well, we can invite anybody, but then for as far as the government is concerned, only controlling officers will come. And if they just refuse to accept our invitation, then they can do whatever they want. But then duty-wise, is it that we can only invite the controlling officers, or is it that the administration will only deploy controlling officers or send them here? But then apparently we can even invite NGOs representatives to come. How come when it comes to the police or police representatives, they can just refuse our invitation? Well, there are 10 members who made the request, and the government has already given us a reply in writing as to the questions that have been raised. Mr. Lee, can you answer the question? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chan, for your question. Well, for overall funding, it covers some 10,000 government projects and items. Generally speaking, for these particular items or projects, the controlling officers for these heads or subheads will come along to answer members' questions on these items. So the purpose of their coming is to answer members' questions, and therefore only relevant officers will come. But then it doesn't mean that only the controlling officers can come and join us in our discussion. But then we have just made reference to some recent precedents and also the past practice of the subcommittee in discussing public works projects or programs. So generally speaking, we would be sending controlling officers for individual subheads to come, and we would also be passing on members' views to the relevant bureaus and departments. Next, Claudia Mo, also on a point of order. Yes, I've read the government's reply, and they said that yes, for the subheads and also revisions to the subheads is proposed by the administration, and is for the legislature to scrutinize and approve. So it's for the legislature to scrutinize and approve. So there is no mention that we can reject it. I find that strange. And they said that that's to ensure that this mechanism will be practical and enforceable, and that would also not constitute any negative impact to the system. But then that would also fully reflect the fact that this legislature has the power to scrutinize and revise the proposal. So they just expect us to approve, and there is no chance that we can decline it or reject it. But then what about controversial issues? Well, they will send people here. And then you said that they are not controlling officers, whether it's the Security Bureau or the police forces representatives. I don't think that's justifiable. Even if it's not the normal practice, we can always make the request. We can always make the suggestion. We have already done that. And at the council meeting, according to the procedures, it's for the president to decide. And you can even be summoned to hear. But then, can you tell us, does it mean that the chairman will not consider that you do have those powers, and you can just summon the CP and the Security Bureau representatives to come and take our questions? So would you be ruling that out, that indeed you have those powers, Claudia Mo? Well, according to the rules of procedure, we do not have the powers of summons. We cannot summon government officials to come. And if you make the request, and of course if it's the individual members' requests, it cannot represent the overall subcommittee's views. So the subcommittee can discuss this. I'm not suggesting that we are summoning them here. But then you are not even prepared to invite them. I did not say that we would not be inviting them, but then I was saying that if we were to make this request or invitation, then we can also discuss it, because the chairman cannot just say that because an individual member has made a suggestion, would be doing that. We have 10 members. So I request that we discuss this now. I suggest that we discuss this now. Okay, I think time is up. Ted Hui, and then we'll have to wrap up our meeting. Mr. Ted Hui, just now the Deputy Secretary already made it clear that, well, according to the rules, they can even invite the CP, Chris Tang, to come along. And then both Claudia Mo and myself would also demand that Chris Tang should come here to justify the projects in relation to the police force. So at the FC meeting, whether or not we're going to invite the CP to come along. In fact, we spent more than 10 hours, and I suspect that you'd like it to be decided as quickly as possible, and we don't want to waste time. So both myself and the DP will be writing to you so that this will be taken out from other items, so that we would not be blocking other items as well. Or are you suggesting that we will be bogged down by this particular item involving the police force?
會議啦，時間過咧。
I need to adjourn the meeting. So, first of all, members' requests. We have already referred that to the government. The government has responded, but we don't have a power to call them to attend the meeting. If you're dissatisfied with the government response and you still want to extend an invitation, the subcommittee can discuss this. We also don't, the rules of procedure don't say how to invite officials to attend meetings. So given that, we can open it up for discussion. I've not ruled out anything, so please remain calm. So the government response is actually very clear. So in your discussion, you can express your opinion, but what is the final outcome, that will be determined by the government. So we also feel our discussion should not consume too much time. So we have already exceeded the appointed time and we cannot have further discussion. Now, members have asked whether some items can be taken out. In the past, over the years, that has been suggested before. It's very clear. And the previous rulings were that according to PWSC practice, they will deal with the funding applications, and it's not appropriate to have separate voting and discussion. So we have had these decisions and rulings in the past. So on this funding application, in this meeting, I will adopt the past practice and ruling. So that is clear. Okay? We've exceeded the appointed time. Adjourn the meeting. Next meeting will be 22nd of January, 10:45. After the ESC. So please attend punctually. Thank you.